Salutations all, and welcome to RWBY Revisited. This time, let's take a look at the antagonists of the series. If you're interested in the main cast themselves, I've already done a video on them, which you can feel free to check out. Please be aware that spoilers for all seasons will follow, and any material expanded upon or revealed in supplementary material will not be weighted as heavily as that which is seen in this show. Now for this video, I will only be examining the characters that are still alive, so Hazel, Watts, Adam, and Torchwick will not be featured here. RWBY's antagonists are extremely varied, and with that, the opinions on how they should be handled are just as varied. Some people want to see almost every villain redeemed, while others want to see them all dead, and everywhere in between. These are obviously not the only ways that the characters could progress, just some thoughts of mine if I were the one in charge. This can serve as food for thought and inspiration for theories. Let's begin with the catalyst behind the series herself, Salem. Salem presents a challenge for any writer, as she is immortal. No matter how much damage she sustains, she'll always recover sooner or later. Not only that, but aside from Ozma and the Maidens, she's the only one capable of using magic, and her skills with it seem far greater than anyone else we've seen. This leads one to question why she doesn't simply walk calmly to whatever objective she wishes, tanking all of the damage anyone can throw at her in the process. This is further complicated by the fact that we don't know the limits of what magic can do, but let's examine what we've been presented. As so few characters can use magic, we haven't seen it in action as much as we've seen semblances. The Maidens thus far have used exclusively elemental-based attacks, with Cinder creating fire, Winter and Raven making ice, and Amber conjuring lightning and wind. Salem can likely use similar abilities, but we haven't seen her do so since she became partially Grim. She has been observed to move objects with a wave of her hand, produce grim arms from thin air, and release blasts of energy that can cause immense pain.
Oh man, you would not believe how much this hurts!
However, her magic doesn't seem to be all-powerful. Hazel was able to restrain her with physical force alone, so it seems as though she either had no means of escaping it, or it somehow didn't occur to her at the time. This leads to one potential method of temporarily disposing of her: containment. As mentioned before, the gods cursed her so that she cannot die, so no amount of firepower will ever bring her down. Only the gods can kill her, at least as far as we know, so any direct confrontation with her is doomed to failure. If she can be restrained, however, then that opens up the possibility that she could be sealed within something somehow. One thought would be to attempt to seal her within a vault at one of the academies, but we don't truly know how those came into being. Did Ozma create them with his magic? If that's the case, then Salem could potentially get out of such a space with her own magic. We also don't know what happens if someone keeps walking into a vault past the relic. Does that space go on forever? Does it connect to somewhere, like the Mystery Land that Volume 9 is set to take place in? Containment would likely be a temporary solution, no matter what is attempted. She's been shown to be able to break through the insides of Monstro, so given time, she could possibly do the same for anything else she's locked within. That means that another alternative is needed. Let's examine her immortality for a moment. The God of Light stated that, "You must learn the importance of life and death. Only then may you rest." A popular theory is that Salem, being partially Grim, could potentially be cleansed of its effects via the silver eyes of RWBY. Salem seems to have it out for people with silver eyes, as she's either had them killed or turned into experiments to create more powerful Grim. We don't know if only silver-eyed individuals can be used to create such creatures, but the only one we've seen has had silver eyes. Logically, that would make silver eyes a threat to Salem in some form or fashion. To what extent that is, we can't say. If they could indeed remove the grim corruption from Salem, then we can't say how she would react. She was vengeful against the gods before, and rightfully so, but this would remove her control over the grim. It's unknown just how much of an effect this corruption had on her, but Jin's narration made it seem as though her core personality was affected.
Stop it. Get some help.
But back to the stipulation the God of Light placed upon her. She needs to understand the importance of life and death. The dialogue portrays it as though once this concept reaches her, then she will be able to die. What exactly the God of Light meant by this is astronomically vague, though. Did he mean that she needs to cherish people while they're still alive? Does it mean that she needs to be patient for her own death so that she can see her loved ones again? We don't have any answers. As for her motivations, she originally seemed almost benevolent. I'll discuss the gods later, as they're the true villains here, but when Ozma first met her again, she intended to work with him to create a better world than what theirs had been. She also had fewer grim features on her person. It wasn't until they had children and discovered that they could use magic that her goals changed. She apparently wanted to breed out normal humans with her descendants, who could use magic. This seems to ignore the fact that they would be horrifically inbred, as all of the first generation would share half of her DNA, no matter what body Ozma inhabited. She also decides to fight Ozma to the death in front of her children, resulting in their deaths. This seems to be where she completely lost it. She isn't without her wiles, however. Certain followers of hers seem to believe that her bringing the 4 relics together will let her create a new world, one that they can be major powers in. Ozma claims that she merely wishes to bring them together so that the gods will kill her along with humanity, a belief that Tyrion shares. Considering the former is impossible for her, that only leaves the latter as a plausible option. Given that humanity and the Faunus likely had to evolve again from scratch, it would have taken millions of years for a sapient species to come into existence for her to interact with. That's enough time to drive anyone insane. After a few centuries, you'll have done just about everything there is to do, and see all that there is to be seen. It's the looming threat of death that drives us, because we know we don't have forever to do what we want. Salem wants out, and the only way to do that is to gather the relics and bring the gods back, all while keeping humanity divided. As of now, the only potential routes I see of vanquishing her would be to somehow contain her, which is dubious at best, as if that were possible, then Ozma logically should have attempted it. Or she could be cleansed of her grim corruption and convinced to see reason. Or the gods could show up and swat her aside, which would be terribly anticlimactic. While having a heart-to-heart isn't the most satisfying way of dealing with such a major villain, that seems to be the only thing that Rooster Teeth has set up at present. I look forward to seeing how this develops, but writing an immortal antagonist really does put your back up against a wall.
Save
One of the most popular antagonists is likely to receive some development next season. Neo's been a fan favorite since her introduction, with her smug nature and exaggerated movements to make up for her inability to speak, winning over loads of people. Neo is now the only one from Remnant other than Jean stuck with Team RWBY in this mystery land, and this means that she'll be required to confront them at some point. After her disappearance during volumes 4 and 5, she's returned with a vendetta against RWBY, as she believes that she killed Torchwick. Now, I haven't read the book fleshing out their dynamic, but Neo clearly loved the man, to the point where she recovered his hat and is never seen without it. Neo's desire for vengeance against RWBY is absolute, as even when they believe that they're falling to their deaths, she still tries to kill her, and torments her by projecting herself as the people that she knows RWBY cares about. Clearly, she cares more about killing RWBY than her own self-preservation. This leads me to believe that she cannot be reasoned with. We've seen that Neo delights in causing pain upon others, and as such, appeals to her morality will be useless. Not only does she not care for anyone else, she's a threat to both Salem's faction and to Team RWBY, as she threatens Cinder herself to get what she wanted. If Neo wants something, she'll do whatever it takes to get it, regardless of who gets hurt in the process. There's also the problem of Neo being mute. Because she can't speak, she can't converse with the characters trapped with her, and that drastically limits the avenues for her development. RWBY also seems to be in the dark about why Neo is after her, based on her lines in the last episode of Volume 8. Nobody else was present when Torchwick was devoured by the Grimm, so no one else can intervene to tell Neo what really happened, unless RWBY has or will discuss the events with her team. All of this means that Neo will likely die confronting Team RWBY. This could force RWBY herself to come to grips that she must be willing to kill to protect those she cares about, and set in motion a change in her character.
Oh! Run! Run! I'm coming for you!
The other possible option is that if they can convince her of the truth, that it was Salem's forces that killed Torchwick, then perhaps she could stand down, at least for a time. Torchwick would never have been in a position to be eaten if it wasn't for RWBY, but his death was at the hands, or rather beak, of the Grimm. Add Cinder's betrayal to the mix, and Neo could possibly ally with them, though she would never join them without her character being destroyed in the process. If this is the route that's taken, she could function as a tertiary character that occasionally supports the main cast, but it would be a case of the enemy of my enemy being my friend, and not that she actually cares about them. If that's the case, then she would probably meet her end, be it against Salem or Cinder. She gave Cinder a good fight in Volume 6, but Cinder barely used her maiden powers during that fight, and she was fresh from her duel against Raven, which she decidedly lost. If Cinder acquires the powers of more than one maiden, then Neo's odds of success are slim. Perhaps she ends up weakening Cinder before the latter faces off against Team RWBY for the last time, her quest for vengeance finally doing some good. But with what we've seen of her, her wrath is going to lead her down a path to her death, the only question being from which faction. Redemption is out of the question for her.
Oh, no, you don't!
As that requires someone to regret what they've done, or have a genuine desire to make up for their past misdeeds. Neo has never demonstrated any such traits. Redemption for her is just something that isn't realistic, given her self-destructive quest for revenge and her lack of empathy for others. Raven is bound to come up in the story again sooner or later. For one thing, Cinder is on a quest to gain the powers of all four maidens, and as such, she's going to have a rematch with Yang's mother at some point. For another, some believe that Raven's semblance is how Team RWBY and Jean will return to Remnant. This solution is too obvious. If Team RWBY could just escape wherever they are via Raven using her semblance, then it would undermine the narrative significance of them being stuck there to begin with. No, when she comes back into the story, it should be for another reason. This isn't to say that they can't attempt to rescue Team RWBY this way. In fact, it would be odd if they didn't. It's shown that Raven has some means of monitoring Yang's well-being, as she shows up to save her from Neo in Season 2. She couldn't have just shown up when her daughter needed her if she had no way of knowing what was going on. She might be able to sense that something strange has happened to her daughter, and discovered that she can't use her semblance to reach her. Her semblance might tell her that Yang is alive, but it could not work properly when she attempts to reach her. This would provide Crow with a hint as what happened to his nieces, and motivate him to more drastic actions in the future. Now, Raven has always been defined by her cowardice. She abandoned the cause when she learned about Salem. She left her newborn daughter to return to her life of banditry. If I were to hazard a guess, this is likely because of fear not only for herself, but also of fear of something happening to those she cares about. She speaks ill of Summer, but she followed her for years, and was even seen smiling in their group photo, something she's never done on screen. Her bandit tribe are depicted as inept thugs, and she doesn't seem to value them all too much. It's possible that she left Yang because she was afraid of getting attached. Summer's death probably hit her hard. She's strong, but she lets her fear drive her. This could be how she comes back into the narrative. She could continue with Crow, as we don't know what she's been up to after she left Haven's vault. She was in tears at the time, so some self-reflection was likely in order. She could reappear in the story when he does, in whatever context that may be. One of the most satisfying routes I believe that the writers could go with would be to have Raven sacrifice herself to save Yang. After seeing RWBY's broadcast from Atlas and being unable to reach Yang, she could undergo an internal crisis. She could wonder how things could have been different if she had been there. This could culminate when Team RWBY returns to Remnant, and they have to face a tremendous threat, be it Cinder or something else. Raven could choose someone over herself for once in her life, and sacrifice herself to save her daughter. This could be a means to pass on the powers of the Spring Maiden to Yang, but Raven might choose to avoid doing so to keep her daughter from having a target on her back. Instead, she could choose to think of another woman, or even a man, so that it goes to someone at random. Redemption in death has been debated for as long as it's been a concept, and some will argue that it is sufficient to redeem a character, while others will say that death is a cheap way out of facing the consequences of their actions. But doing this for Raven, while it would still be debatable, would give her a spot of light on an otherwise dark history. Tyrion is a character that's never had much depth to him. He's been Salem's attack dog and hound, and that's about as far as it goes. That's not necessarily a bad thing, though. Not every character needs to have incredible depth to them. In writing, characters can be either round or flat. Round characters have nuance and depth to them, while flat characters are uncomplicated and are around to fill a specific purpose in the story. There's also the dichotomy of static and dynamic characters. Static characters don't change over the course of the narrative, while dynamic characters undergo significant development. Not every character needs to be dynamic and round, especially for secondary characters. Tyrion is a destruction-craving zealot that sees Salem as his goddess. There's no real need or reason for this to change. Salem tells him to jump, he asks how high. His fighting skill, though, is what makes him important to the story. He's strong enough to take on all the remaining members of Team Juniper plus Ruby at once, and only Cinder's been shown to be able of accomplishing something similar, and she relies on the Fall Maiden's power to do so. This is his role. Despite this, such a simple character can overstay their welcome if they're used too frequently, so he may meet his end in Vacuo, or see less screen time afterwards. I put forward a theory in my previous installment that he may kill Nora and Ren, and following up on this, that may serve as a catalyst to get the major players of Vacuo involved. If Nora and Ren are involved in uniting the kingdom, then their deaths may show them that Salem's forces are not to be taken lightly. Then there's Mercury.
You don't want to be like this. This is disgusting. This is awful in every way. If I could kill it, I would. But I legally can't.
I've always hated him for his ego and delight at the suffering of others, but that's besides the point. After Season 3, he's had little screen time, but he's consistently been portrayed as always putting himself first. He has a few moments with Emerald, but their dynamic shifts between amicability and hostility. He's been sent to Vacuo with Tyrion, and he made a point to rub it in Cinder's face how he no longer answers to her. He believed that Salem was going to create a new world with the power of the relics, and that he would be given a prominent position in it in return for his service. Tyrion explained to him that Salem only wants destruction for the world and everything in it, though, and that seemed to unnerve him. Redeeming Mercury is out of the question. He recorded the fall of Beacon for his own enjoyment, for crying out loud. No, there are likely only two routes available for him at this point in the story. The first option would involve him sticking to his guns and remaining loyal to Salem. Whether that's because he still believes he'll be rewarded, or because he believes that he's in too deep would fill largely the same role in this motivation. If this is the path that the writers take, then I can't think of a better way to write him than him being killed by Emerald. This would not only end his threat, which is significant, but it would cement to the others that Emerald has truly gone over to their side. Ending the threat of one of Salem's most powerful agents would prove beyond doubt that she's no longer on her side. The other route would be for him to abandon Salem to rejoin Emerald. If this happens, it would be much like the scenario I discussed with Neo, being an enemy of my enemy dichotomy. He'll certainly never be a good person, or friendly towards the protagonists, but he can handle himself in a fight and would be a valuable asset, perhaps even functioning as a spy. This could even result in him regaining his semblance, as we have next to no details on how it was taken from him. We know that his father took it away, but we don't even know what it was or how his father took it. Did his father only disable his ability to use it, or did he somehow remove it entirely? A stressful situation, combined with an internal crisis, could counteract whatever his father did, and thus restore his semblance. Now let's talk about Cinder.
Did you think I would forget you?
She's been the poster character of the antagonists for most of the series, but she's definitely had her ups and downs. She slew Pyrrha and initiated the fall of Beacon, which was one of the most major events of the show, but she had almost nothing but a string of defeats afterwards. She decidedly lost against Raven, and in doing so lost the Relic of Knowledge, at least at that time. She was trounced by Winter, Penny, and a dying Freya, and failed to steal the powers of the Winter Maiden. She then failed again when she confronted Penny and Amity. On top of this, she's been openly ridiculed and tormented by Salem, making her seem lesser than she did in earlier volumes. All of this stems from how she let her success in Vale go to her head. When she stayed patient and followed a plan, likely laid out by Watts, she was able to achieve decisive victories, but after becoming the Fall Maiden, she simply rushed headfirst into confrontation after confrontation, and came out the worse for it. She does seem to have had a bit of a revelation recently. After Watts laid out exactly why she's failed ever since Beacon, she stops to come up with a plan and follows through with it. This resulted in her personally sending 3 members of Team RWBY into the Void, and she obtained both the Staff of Creation and recovered the Relic of Knowledge. This is the sort of thing that Cinder needs to be doing to maintain her status as a true threat. Her consistent string of losses has been making her look weak for some time now, but if she's returned to more calculated methods, then things could get quite interesting. Cinder's main objective has been to accumulate the powers of all the maidens. This setup falls under the category of a Chekhov's gun. To put it simply, the concept of a Chekhov's gun is that if you go into detail about Chekhov having a gun, then he needs to use it at some point. Cinder needs to acquire the power of at least another maiden. I suspect that she may be successful in killing both Winter and the Summer Maiden, and absorb their powers in the process. This would not only personally invest Weiss, and by extension the rest of Team RWBY, but Cinder would become even more of a threat. If she were to obtain the power of 3 maidens, 4 if she were to take Raven's power, she could be almost unstoppable by conventional means. That brings us to Cinder's Grim Arm. It's slowly taken over more of her body as the series has gone on, and it serves as a method for Salem to exert control over her. With the revelation of Salem using people in her experiments with the Grimm, then Cinder is likely just a means to an end for Salem. Once she obtains the Maiden's powers, the Grimm could completely consume her, converting her into a completely loyal servant to Salem with the powers of all 4 maidens. Thus, Cinder's main desire would be her undoing. A Grimm-consumed Cinder would likely need to be killed by RWBY and her Silver Eyes in conjunction with her team, and whether this is a kill out of mercy or wrath would certainly be an intriguing development. As for what would happen to the Maiden powers after this, then that could go just about anywhere. We don't know if one person can have the power of multiple Maidens through natural means, but if not, then the powers could go to the members of Team RWBY or other characters, such as Emerald. We did get to see Cinder's backstory in Volume 8, but it doesn't hold much relevance, aside from explaining why she wants power, and demonstrating how inept Rhodes was, and how child labor laws are either non-existent or not enforced. We should have seen how Cinder met Salem, and how she was able to convince Cinder to join her. I've saved the biggest for last, the gods. Oh boy, where do I begin with these two? They're nearly omnipotent, being able to curse Salem with immortality, resurrect Ozma, and then kill him again on a whim, grant Ozma the ability to reincarnate indefinitely, and annihilate all of humanity without a second thought.
Why are you the way that you are?
Wow. These guys aren't exactly good. In fact, Remnant is far better off without them. They seemed to believe they taught humanity things, but they seemed almost absent in Jin's narration, not leaving their respective realms. No humans are seen in those areas until Salem leads an army there. They also aren't all-knowing, as Salem was able to lead an army against them without them knowing it was her initially, and the God of Dark was almost tricked by her to bring back Ozma. They also can't seem to grasp any reasonable notion of how to teach humanity. What was their response to a grieving Salem? To curse her so that she could never see her beloved again. Then there's the ultimatum they gave to Ozma. When the relics are brought together and they return, they'll see if humanity is united. If they aren't, then they'll kill them all again. Just like that. They gave beings free will with the ability to form their own thoughts, and then proceed to judge them for not being a uniform hive mind. That isn't how free will works. People will always disagree with one another on even the most basic issues. That's how free will functions. You're never going to agree with someone 100% of the time. For the sake of everyone in Remnant, the relics need to be kept as far away from each other as possible. The world is better off without these two maniacs calling the shots. If they appear, then they would need a massive talking to on how they can't expect all humans everywhere to always be united. As wonderful as that sounds, it just isn't possible. I'd like to thank you for listening, and I'd enjoy reading on how you'd handle the antagonists of RWBY in the comments. May you all have a weapon in each hand.